Okay, everyone, welcome back to another, or well, technically the first episode of BeginnersJava.com's tutorial series. This is actually the 15th tutorial in the series, and I wanted to begin by thanking everybody who's stuck with me for these last couple of weeks. It's been crazy. I've been making the new websites, I've had some family problems, I've had a lot of stuff going on. So for those of you who have stuck around and are still interested in learning Java, I'm really happy to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to helping you out. For those of you who are new to the videos, I hope you guys are going to enjoy what we have going forward from here. And today, I wanted to talk about arrays. And actually, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to keep sort of what I had, and I'll make the rest back up later. Now, we're going to start by sort of moving this down, because I wanted to talk first about what a normal integer kind of is, and then what an array is. So first things first, a normal integer is sort of viewed by the compiler like this. It is first initialized, and then it's set to just hold one value. It's set just to hold this value 5 in this case. You'll notice that I made these parentheses so that they'll only fit one number in there. If I try to put in more than one number, it's just not going to work. It's going to crash the program. I mean, if I were to try to do something like this, if int I equals 5, comma 2, comma 5, comma 7, comma 8, it's not going to work. That's because that's not how integers work. So now what I wanted to show you guys is how to get around that, because a lot of people have sort of asked me, how can I use more variables but without, I don't need 100 different items. Maybe in a store I have 100 items, but I have item numbers. So wouldn't it be easier for me to kind of have an index of item numbers and, something like that? And my answer is always, well, we can't get into that yet because we haven't talked about arrays. And that's what an array is really good for. An array is good at storing a lot of information about the same sort of things. So we're going to get into implementations on what arrays might store in the next couple of days. So what I wanted to show you guys now, though, is sort of how to first declare an array, and then how to play with an array. So you'll notice that this first thing I've done right here, int an array, followed by a set of brackets. The set of brackets means it's going to be an array, equals new int 5. And this new int 5 part really means that we are making an array that is going to hold 5 numbers. And now we don't technically need this part, but it's good to use it when we know how big the array is going to be. And we're going to get a lot more into new probably in the next 10 to 15 lessons. Right now we're not going to talk too much about the memory side of things because Java doesn't have such an intense focus on memory the way C++ does. But when we run this statement, what the compiler builds us is something like this. Makes us an array that is just empty. There's not even zeros in there. There's nothing there. I mean, in this case, there's blank spaces, but that's not even a good enough representation. There's just nothing in there. And sometimes, instead of there being nothing, there's junk. So, I mean, you might have something, like that instead. I mean, that's really not helpful to you. So it depends what was in the memory location at the time when, you had this allocated. So the very first thing we want to do with an array is initialize it to 0. Always initialize it to 0. There should never be a question in your mind if, oh, maybe I can get around doing this. You don't have to initialize it to 0, but initialize it to something. Because otherwise you might end up with junk in the middle of your program and you're going to have to go back and track it down. It's, why debug when you don't have to? initialized to 0. And so what I did here was I wanted to show you guys something that's extremely important. And this is where most people who have not yet gotten to arrays get confused and they lose it and they have a hard time understanding arrays. And this is what's known as the index. And what the index of an array technically is the number of the position. So to the left, I've actually put the index in the array itself. So this first position, if I were to ask a person, maybe the first three people that finish a race, the first person to finish, we'd say, well, that's the first, and the second, and the third. In terms of arrays, it's completely different. The first, or well, what a human would know as the first position, is actually the 0th position. And the second position is really the first position, and then the second, third, and fourth positions, in what humans would know as the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth positions. So let's assume now that we had an array, and it was filled up just like this one, with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And somebody thought to themselves, well, I put the number 1 in the first location, I put the number 2 in the second location. So maybe they would, call on the array with the number 3, thinking that they would get whatever's in this third position out. But that's not the case, because remember, it's actually going 0, 1, 2, and right there is where that 3 they wanted is, and then 3, which would actually correlate to 4. So just by not knowing how arrays are indexed, you can cause errors in your own programs. So I want you guys to be very careful about that. That's one of, if not the most common error with arrays. And I mean, I'm prone to it too. I will still make mistakes with arrays. It's entirely possible. Even the pros do it. So, well, typically the pros won't be working with arrays. We're going to be getting into other data types and things of that nature. But I just want you guys to be very mindful that this right here is really going to help you better understand it. And, maybe after you guys have tinkered around a little bit, you'll want to come back and look at that. So I'm going to leave that in when I post this up on IDE 1. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to teach you guys something that's been asked of me a few times. A lot of people have wanted to know, how can I let the user enter, maybe how many items they want to enter or something along those lines. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you guys a quick little example. I helped somebody make a project that was similar to this not too long ago. And I think that this is going to be very useful for some of you guys. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make 2 arrays, and I'm going to propagate them both. And so here's the way I'm going to do that. I'm going to start off by doing a system.out.print. I don't know why, but I don't think I've spelled println right once with you guys. Every time I type it, it's wrong. So what I'm going to say here is something along the lines of how many items would you like to enter? And we'll toss that there, and I gotta close my parentheses. And so we'll say int x equals input dot next int. So that way we're going to be taking in for some value of x. And what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 arrays here, and they're going to be the same size. So what we're going to do is we're going to say int, let's say item array, and we're going to say equals new int x, and we're also going to say int item cost. And we're going to also set that equal to new int. Actually, you know what? Let's do a double. Because cost is going to always be double. And I know exactly why that's yelling at me. Because X is not a double. Yeah, so, okay, that's going to be a little bit of a pain. Oh, actually, yeah, I can do that. Never mind. I just forgot my semicolon at the end and I freaked out. My bad. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to first initialize these two arrays. So the way we're going to do that is just like this. We're going to say for int I equals 0. And since we know that these two arrays are the same length, we can do this. Normally you'd want to use two separate loops. So we're going to take item array. Oops. What am I doing? I is less than item array dot length. And I'm going to tell you why I use that in just a second. I plus plus. Okay, so now rather than saying I is less than X, I don't like to do that because if X ever gets changed throughout the course of a program, you can end up with off by 1 errors, you can end up with off by 100 errors, arrays out of bounds errors, and it's really hard tracking those down. Whereas if we use less than item array dot length and just a simple iterator like this, we shouldn't be running into too many problems. We shouldn't be getting out of bounds or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say item array of I is equal to 0. And then we're going to just copy paste that and change it to item cost is equal to 0. So what we're doing here is just initializing. Okay, and what are we doing for time here? Ooh, gotta hurry up. So what we'll do now is we're going to take in a couple of values for each of these. And I'm going to do this really quick. But before I move on, I just wanted to let you guys know, and I'm going to be verbose in my comments. This thing that I said of I earlier, that's known as the subscript. And that's very important. The subscript is how we're going to access different locations in our array. So up here where I have this 3, so an array 3 up above would actually be an array of 2, like that. So assuming that I equals 2, then it would be an array of I. Alright, so continuing on. Oh, I'm not going to have time for this. This is going to be a two-parter, guys. Stick with me.